It started on an unremarkable Tuesday evening, the kind that passes quietly in suburban Hartford. I'd just gotten home from work, expecting the usual, the aroma of dinner cooking, the hum of the news on the TV, and maybe a kiss from my wife, Julia. Instead, I found her sitting at the dining table, her laptop closed in front of her, and a look on her face that didn't match the welcoming warmth I was used to. It was more resolute. My instincts told me something was wrong. "Hey, Jules," I said, hanging my coat on the rack. "Everything okay? Sam, can we talk?" Her voice was steady, but lacked its usual softness. I froze, the words "we need to talk" sparking an immediate tension in my chest. "Sure," I said, cautiously taking a seat across from her. "What's on your mind?" She exhaled, folding her hands on the table, as if rehearsing her lines. "I want to be honest with you about something, and I need you to listen before reacting." My stomach tightened. This wasn't just about something mundane like our budget or the kids' grades. I could feel it. "All right," I said slowly. "I'm listening." She hesitated, then dropped the bombshell. "I've been seeing someone." For a moment, my brain refused to process the words. "Seeing someone? As in cheating?" My voice betrayed my disbelief. "What do you mean, seeing someone?" Her eyes met mine, calm yet pleading. "I mean, I've been involved with someone at work. His name is Ethan. It started a few months ago." Ethan. The name meant nothing to me, but the weight of it crashed down like an avalanche. My lovely, devoted wife, who I had spent 14 years of my life with, was sitting here admitting to infidelity without tears, without excuses. Just admitting it. My jaw clenched as anger and hurt bubbled to the surface. "You've been cheating on me? Are you serious right now, Julia?" "It's not like that," she said quickly, her tone almost too measured. "It's not about you, Sam. It's about us, about what's been missing." "Missing?" I shot back, standing up abruptly. "You think screwing some guy named Ethan is the solution to our problems?" She flinched but didn't look away. "I'm not saying it was right. I want us to be able to talk about this, to figure out a way forward." I laughed bitterly, pacing the room. "Figure out a way forward? You're kidding, right? What do you expect me to say to this, Julia?" She stood up, her voice steady but more insistent now. "Sam, listen to me. I don't want to lose you. I love you. But I think we need to reimagine what our marriage looks like. To give each other space to explore safely, openly. Space." I turned to face her, disbelief dripping from my words. "You mean you want to keep this Ethan guy in your life and still stay married to me?" "I'm not asking for anything one-sided," she said, stepping closer. "This isn't about replacing you, Sam. It's about finding a way for both of us to feel fulfilled." I stared at her, unable to believe what I was hearing. "You're asking for an open marriage?" "Yes," she admitted, her tone quiet but firm. "I think it's the only way we can save us. It's better than lying, better than sneaking around. We set boundaries, we agree on rules, and we keep our family intact." It was the most surreal moment of my life. My wife, the woman I trusted above all else, was standing in front of me, proposing something I never thought I'd hear. My mind spun with anger, confusion, and pain. This was only the beginning of a conversation that would shatter everything I thought I knew about love, fidelity, and the woman I had pledged my life to. The house was eerily quiet after Julia's declaration. I stood there, trying to process her words, but they felt foreign, like they belonged to someone else's life. Open marriage. Julia. My wife. These ideas didn't fit together. Yet here they were, crashing into my reality. "I can't believe this," I muttered, pacing the room. "I can't believe you're even suggesting it." Julia remained calm, watching me with a mix of determination and something else. Hope, maybe? It was infuriating. "Sam, please," she said softly. "Sit down. Let's talk about this." "I don't need to sit down," I snapped, running a hand through my hair. "What I need is to understand how we went from happily married to whatever this is." Julia hesitated, then pulled out a chair and sat, folding her hands on the table again. "It didn't happen overnight," she admitted. "You've been so busy with work, the kids, everything. And I felt invisible. Invisible." I shot back. "Julia, I've been working to keep this house running, to provide for our family. If you felt invisible, why not talk to me? Why not tell me instead of—" My voice broke. "Instead of going to him." She winced but didn't break eye contact. "I know. I should have said something sooner. I should have handled this differently. But Ethan, he didn't make me feel invisible. He made me feel seen. I clenched my fists, swallowing the bile rising in my throat. And what about me? Did you think about what this would do to me? To the kids? Of course I did, she said, her voice cracking for the first time. But Sam, we're not the same people we were when we got married. We've grown, changed, and somewhere along the way, we stopped growing together. Her words hit hard because, deep down, I knew there was truth to them. Our marriage had become a routine, a comfortable, predictable rhythm that didn't leave much room for passion or excitement. But still how could this be the answer? I slumped into the chair across from her, my anger momentarily deflated. So, what happens now? You get your space, and I just what? Sit here and wait for you to come home from your dates with Ethan? No, she said quickly, leaning forward. It's not about me just doing whatever I want. It's about us redefining our relationship. You could explore too. We could set rules, boundaries. It doesn't have to mean the end of us. I laughed bitterly. Rules, boundaries. Do you even hear yourself? Julia, you've already crossed the biggest boundary there is. She looked down at her hands, her composure cracking further. I know, and I'm sorry, but I don't want to lose you, Sam. I love you. I just think we need more than what we've been giving each other. Silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. My mind reeled with questions I couldn't ask, emotions I couldn't name. The betrayal stung like a fresh wound, but so did the possibility that maybe she was right. Maybe we had grown apart. What about Ethan? I finally asked, my voice low. Is he part of this plan of yours? Julia hesitated, then nodded. Yes, for now. But this isn't just about him, Sam. It's about us finding a way to be happy again. I shook my head, unable to meet her eyes. I don't know if I can do this, Julia. I don't know if I can look at you the same way again. She reached across the table, her hand hovering near mine. I'm not asking for an answer right now. Just think about it. Please. For us. For the kids. Her hand touched mine, and for a brief moment, I felt the warmth of the woman I had loved for nearly 15 years. But now, that warmth was tinged with something else, something I couldn't quite place. It wasn't hope. It wasn't trust. It was uncertainty. Think about it, she repeated softly. Then she stood and left the room, leaving me alone with the impossible weight of her words. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the empty chair where she'd been. My mind raced with images of Julia and Ethan, of the life we'd built together, and of a future that now felt painfully unclear. This wasn't just a decision about our marriage. It was a decision about who I wanted to be, about the kind of man and father I needed to become. And as much as I hated to admit it, part of me was terrified of what I might discover. The next morning came too quickly. I barely slept, tossing and turning as Julia's words replayed in my head like a broken record. Open marriage. Space. Boundaries. None of it made sense. She wanted to save us by breaking us apart. At least that's how it felt to me. When I finally got out of bed, the house was quiet. Julia had already left for work. I found a note on the kitchen counter in her neat, practiced handwriting. Sam, I know this isn't easy, but I hope you'll take the day to think about what we talked about. Let's talk tonight. Please. Love, Julia. The word love at the end of the note hit harder than it should have. How could she claim to love me and still do this? The anger I'd felt last night began to creep back, but this time it was mixed with something else, doubt. I couldn't stay in the house. I needed air, space, somebody to clear my head. I grabbed my keys and drove aimlessly, the Connecticut suburbs blurring past as I turned down street after street. I ended up at the park near our old apartment, the one we lived in before the kids were born. Back then, we'd spend hours here, lying on the grass and dreaming about the life we were going to build. It felt like another lifetime. I sat on a bench, staring at the lake. My phone buzzed in my pocket, jolting me out of my thoughts. It was Lucas, my oldest friend, and the only person I felt like I could call right now. I hit answer. Hey man, Lucas said. What's up? You sound off. I hesitated. Where do you even start with something like this? Julia. She's cheating on me. I said finally, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. Lucas was silent for a moment. Jesus, Sam. Are you sure? She admitted it. Some guy at work. Ethan. I spat the name like it was poison. And that's not even the worst part. There's worse, he asked, disbelief heavy in his voice. She wants to open the marriage, I said. Thinks it'll save us or something. Lucas let out a low whistle. Wow, that's not what I was expecting you to say. Yeah, join the club? I leaned back, staring at the sky. What the hell do I do, man? I can't even wrap my head around this. Lucas sighed. Look, I'm not going to pretend I know what you're going through. But if you want my advice, don't make any decisions right now. You're pissed, and for good reason. But don't let her back you into a corner. Take your time. Figure out what you want. What I want is for this not to be happening, I said bitterly. I get that, he said. But you can't change what's already done. You've got to think about what's next, whether that means fixing things or walking away. Fixing things, walking away. Both options felt impossible. I'll think about it, I muttered. Thanks, Lucas. Anytime, man. Call me if you need to vent. I hung up and sat there for a while longer, watching ducks glide across the water. Lucas was right, I needed to figure out what I wanted. But how could I do that when everything I thought I knew about my marriage was suddenly in question? When I got home, Julia was already there, sitting at the dining table like she had been the night before. She looked up as I walked in, her expression cautious. Hey, she said, how was your day? Don't, I said sharply, dropping my keys on the counter. Don't act like everything's normal. She flinched but nodded. Okay, let's talk. I sat down across from her, the same place I'd been the night before. I've been thinking, I said, and I need answers, Julia. Real ones. No sugarcoating. Okay, she said, her voice soft. Ask me anything. Why I demanded. Why, Ethan? She hesitated, her eyes dropping to the table. He noticed me, she said finally. He paid attention in a way I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't planned, Sam. It just happened. And what about me? I shot back. You didn't think to tell me you felt that way? To try to fix things before jumping into bed with someone else? I did think about it, she said, but I didn't know how to say it. And by the time I figured it out, it was too late. I'd already started something with him. The words cut deep, but I forced myself to stay calm. So, what now? You want to keep seeing him? While I what? Find someone for myself. I don't want to lose you, Sam, she said, her voice breaking. That's all I know for sure. The rest we can figure out together. Her tears came then, but they didn't soften the pain in my chest. This wasn't something we could fix with tears or promises. This was a fracture, and I had no idea if it could ever heal. The silence after her tears felt endless. I wanted to speak, to shout, to say anything that could make sense of this nightmare, but the words wouldn't come. Julia sat across from me, wiping at her eyes with the sleeve of her sweater, her vulnerability almost making me pity her. Almost. You've broken us, Julia, I said finally, my voice quiet but sharp. Do you get that? There's no version of this where things go back to how they were. She nodded, her gaze fixed on the table. I know, Sam, but I don't want to lose what we still have. That's why I'm suggesting this. You keep saying that. I snapped, the anger bubbling back to the surface. But do you hear yourself? You're asking me to share you with someone else. How the hell does that save anything? Her lips tightened, and for the first time, her calm demeanor faltered. Because it's better than losing everything. Look, Sam, I know this isn't what you want. It's not what I wanted either, but we're here. We've grown apart, and this is the only way I can think of to give us both what we need without blowing up our family. Blowing up our family? I repeated bitterly. And what do you call this? Do you really think Chloe and Ethan won't figure out what's happening if we do this? You think they won't see through the cracks? She flinched, but she held her ground. We can make it work. We can be honest with each other, set boundaries, and make it clear that our marriage, our family, is still the priority. Other couples have done it, Sam. It's not impossible. Her words hung in the air, a twisted mix of desperation and determination. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples as the weight of her proposition settled over me. So what, Julia? I asked finally, my voice hollow. You get to keep seeing Ethan, and I'm supposed to just be okay with that? And if I decide I want to explore too, you're fine with that? Her jaw tightened. If that's what you need, then yes. I'd be okay with it. I studied her face, searching for any sign that this was a game, a way to absolve herself of guilt. But she looked serious. Too serious. You've already thought this through, haven't you? I said. You've been planning this. Her silence was answer enough. Unbelievable. I muttered, standing and pacing the room. You don't just get to burn down our marriage and hand me the ashes like it's some kind of gift, Julia. I'm not burning it down, she said firmly. I'm trying to rebuild it. To rebuild us. I know I messed up, Sam. I know I betrayed you. But I don't want to lose you. I'm asking you to try. That's all. I stopped pacing and turned to face her. You think you can make this clean? That you can set some rules, put it in a neat little box, and it'll be fine. But it won't, Julia. This will change everything. I know, she said, her voice breaking again. But I'm willing to take that risk because I still love you, Sam. I still believe in us. I stared at her, trying to find the woman I married in the stranger sitting before me. She was there, somewhere, buried under layers of betrayal and desperation. But could I still love her? Could I even begin to accept what she was asking? I need time, I said finally, the words heavy in my chest. She nodded slowly. Take all the time you need. Just don't shut me out completely, okay? I didn't answer. Instead, I walked upstairs, closing the door to our bedroom and locking it behind me. The room felt cold, suffocating. On her nightstand, a framed photo of us from our honeymoon mocked me with its frozen happiness. I sat on the edge of the bed, my head in my hands, as questions raced through my mind. Could I forgive her? Could I live with what she was asking? And more importantly, who was I if I couldn't? The next day, I woke up to the sound of muffled laughter coming from downstairs. Chloe and Ethan were watching some cartoon in the living room, their voices carefree and full of energy. For a brief moment, I envied them. To them, everything was still normal. Mom and Dad were still the same, their world intact. I stayed in bed longer than I should have, staring at the ceiling and replaying the events of the last 2 days. Julia's betrayal, her insane proposition, the complete upheaval of everything I thought I knew. It all felt surreal, like I was trapped in someone else's life. Eventually, the smell of coffee dragged me out of bed. I shuffled downstairs, finding Julia in the kitchen pouring herself a cup. She was wearing her usual weekend clothes, jeans and a loose sweater. But something about her seemed different, more careful, like she was measuring her movements to avoid setting me off. Morning, she said softly, glancing at me as I walked in. I didn't respond. Instead, I grabbed a mug and poured my own coffee, the silence between us loud enough to drown out the kids' TV show in the next room. I was thinking we could go to the park later, Julia ventured, her tone cautious. The kids have been cooped up all week. I can take them, I said flatly, not looking at her. Her shoulders sagged slightly, but she nodded. Okay, that's fine. I left the kitchen without another word, sitting in the living room with Chloe and Ethan. They greeted me with grins, completely unaware of the storm brewing between their parents. Morning, Dad, Chloe said. Are we doing pancakes today? Not today, sweetheart, I replied, forcing a smile. How about we head to the park instead? They both cheered, already running off to get their shoes. I leaned back on the couch, sipping my coffee and wondering how much longer I could keep up the charade. Later that afternoon, while the kids were playing on the swings, I sat on a bench with my phone, scrolling aimlessly through news articles I wasn't really reading. My mind kept drifting back to Julia's proposition. Every time I thought about it, I felt like punching something. Hey, Sam. I looked up to see Rachel, one of the moms from Ethan's soccer team, walking toward me with a warm smile. She was carrying a thermos and had her toddler in tow, who was waddling toward the sandbox. Rachel, I said, nodding. How's it going? Oh, busy as always. She sat down next to me, unscrewing the thermos lid. Coffee? No, thanks, I said. She sipped from her thermos, glancing at the kids on the swings. Ethan looks like he's having fun. Yeah, I said, watching my son laugh as Chloe tried to push him higher. Rachel looked at me more closely, her brow furrowing slightly. You okay? You seem distracted. I hesitated, the urge to unload everything bubbling to the surface. But Rachel wasn't a close friend. She was just another parent from the team. Telling her felt inappropriate. And yet, the idea of talking to someone who wasn't directly involved was tempting. Just some family stuff, I said vaguely. She nodded sympathetically. Yeah, I get it. Marriage is hard sometimes. Her casual comment caught me off guard. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time noticed how pretty she was. Not in an over-the-top way, but in that natural, effortless kind of way. I didn't mean to pry, Rachel said, standing up as her toddler came toddling back to her. But if you ever want to talk, as a friend, I'm around. Thanks, I said, forcing a smile. She walked away, her little one clutching her hand. I watched them for a moment, my mind swirling. Could I ever do what Julia was asking? Could I even entertain the idea of stepping outside our marriage? Of pursuing something with someone like Rachel, or anyone for that matter? The thought made my stomach churn, but there was also a strange flicker of curiosity. As the kids ran back toward me, their cheeks flushed from the cool air, I pushed the thought aside. For now, my focus had to be on them, on keeping things as normal as possible for their sake. But deep down, I knew the conversation with Julia wasn't over. It was only just beginning. That night, the air between Julia and me was thick with unspoken tension. The kids were in bed, the house quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. I sat in the living room, a glass of whiskey in hand, staring at nothing in particular. My thoughts were a tangled mess, shifting between anger, confusion, and a nagging curiosity about how the hell we'd gotten here. Julia emerged from the hallway, her steps tentative. She was wearing a worn sweater I remembered buying her years ago, back when everything still felt right between us. It was almost like she was trying to evoke a sense of nostalgia, a way to soften me. "Can I sit?" she asked softly, gesturing to the chair across from me. I didn't look at her. "It's your house, too," I said flatly, sipping my drink. She sat down, folding her hands in her lap. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she broke the silence. "I know this is hard for you," she said. "Hard?" I barked a bitter laugh. "Julia, you cheated on me. You're asking me to open our marriage so you can keep seeing the guy. Hard doesn't even begin to cover it." She winced but didn't back down. "I'm not asking you to just accept this without question, Sam. I'm asking you to consider it, to think about what it could mean for us, for keeping our family together." I slammed my glass down on the coffee table, the sound sharp and angry. "Stop saying this is about the family. You didn't give a damn about the family when you started screwing Ethan behind my back." Her eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't moved. "Not this time. You're right," she said, her voice trembling. "I made a mistake, a terrible one, but I'm trying to fix it the only way I know how. By rewriting the rules of our marriage." I shot back. "Do you even hear how insane that sounds?" She looked at me, her expression resolute despite the tears on her cheeks. "What do you want me to do, Sam? Beg for forgiveness? Pretend I can go back in time and undo what happened? I can't, and neither can you. All we can do is figure out where to go from here." "And where is that, Julia?" I demanded, because I sure as hell don't see a path forward in any of this. She hesitated, then leaned forward, her voice quieter but no less firm. "You said you wanted answers. So ask me. Whatever you need to know, I'll tell you." The invitation hung in the air like a challenge. I downed the rest of my whiskey and set the glass aside, leaning back in my chair. "Fine," I said. "Why him? What did he give you that I couldn't?" Julia took a deep breath, her hands tightening in her lap. "It wasn't about him being better than you, Sam. It was he paid attention. He made me feel wanted in a way I hadn't felt in years." Her words stung, but I forced myself to press on. "And you couldn't just talk to me about that?" "I should have," she admitted. "But I was scared. Scared you wouldn't understand. Or worse, that you'd agree, but nothing would change." And then Ethan. He was there. "It wasn't planned, Sam. It just happened." "That's the thing, Julia," I said, my voice rising. "It didn't just happen. You made a choice. A choice to betray me, to betray our marriage. And now you're sitting here asking me to just share you, to accept this as the new normal. I'm not asking you to be okay with it overnight," she said, "but I'm asking you to try. For us. For everything we've built together." I shook my head, standing up and pacing the room. "You keep saying us, but I don't even know what that means anymore." She stood too, her voice growing firmer. "It means I still love you, Sam, and I believe we can make this work if we're willing to try." I turned to face her, the raw emotion in her eyes catching me off guard. For a brief moment, I saw a glimmer of the woman I had fallen in love with all those years ago. But now, that love was buried under layers of betrayal and doubt. "I need more time," I said finally. Her shoulders sagged, but she nodded. "Take all the time you need. Just don't shut me out completely." I didn't answer. Instead, I walked past her, heading upstairs to the guest room. As I lay on the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling, one thought kept circling in my mind. Was this marriage even worth saving? The following week was a slow descent into madness. Julia and I fell into a strange limbo where we avoided the subject altogether while pretending for the kids that everything was normal. We went through the motions: dinners, carpools, bedtime routines. But every glance between us felt like a loaded weapon, every shared space heavy with unspoken words. I slept in the guest room most nights, claiming I was working late and didn't want to disturb her. That wasn't entirely a lie. I did stay up late, though not working. I spent those hours sitting in the dark, nursing drinks and scrolling through articles about open marriages, infidelity, and relationships gone wrong. None of it gave me the answers I was looking for. On Thursday, Lucas called again. "How's it going?" he asked, his voice cautious. "Terrible," I admitted. Julia's trying to act like things are fine, but nothing's fine. She keeps giving me space, but I don't even know what I'm supposed to do with it. "Have you talked to her again?" "Not really," I said. "What's the point? Every time I look at her, all I can think about is him." Lucas sighed. "I get it, but you can't stay in this holding pattern forever, man. Sooner or later, you're going to have to decide what you want." What I wanted. It felt impossible to define. I wanted the life we had before, the one where Julia was mine and mine alone. But that life was gone, and no amount of wishing could bring it back. "I'll figure it out," I muttered, though the words felt hollow even as I said them. The weekend brought no relief. On Saturday, Julia suggested we go out as a family. I reluctantly agreed, figuring the kids deserve something normal for once. We ended up at the aquarium downtown, walking through the exhibits like we were still the perfect suburban family. Chloe and Ethan ran ahead, pressing their faces to the glass and pointing out exotic fish. Julia stayed close to me, her hand occasionally brushing mine. Each accidental touch sent a jolt through me, a confusing mix of anger, longing, and resentment. At one point, she leaned in and whispered, "Thank you for doing this. It means a lot to them." I nodded stiffly, unable to respond. Later, as we were leaving, we passed by a small cafe. Julia suggested getting coffee, and before I could think of an excuse, the kids begged for pastries. I reluctantly followed them inside, sitting at a table while Julia ordered. As I watched her at the counter, a sudden thought struck me. I wasn't just angry. I was jealous. Jealous that she'd shared parts of herself with someone else. Parts one used to believe were mine alone. It wasn't just the physical betrayal. It was the emotional one, too. When she came back with our drinks, she hesitated before sitting down, as if waiting for my permission. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. After the kids had devoured their pastries and ran off to look at a fountain outside, I finally broke the silence. "Julia," I said, my voice low but firm. She looked up startled. "Yes, I've been thinking about what you said." Her eyes widened slightly, a mix of hope and caution. "And," I leaned forward, clasping my hands together. "If we do this, if I even consider doing this, there have to be rules. Clear rules. And I mean it, Julia. If you cross even one of them, we're done." Her breath hitched, and she nodded quickly. "Of course. Anything you need. Just tell me, Sam." I took a deep breath, hating myself for even entertaining the idea, but unable to see another way forward. "First," I said, "he's not allowed in this house. Ever. I don't care if the kids are gone or I'm at work. This place is off limits." "Agreed," she said immediately. "Second, you tell me everything. No sneaking around, no surprises. If you're seeing him, I want to know. When, where, how long, everything." "Okay," she said, her voice trembling. "And third," I said, meeting her eyes, "if I decide to see someone else, you don't get to question it. You don't get to interfere. If this is what you want, Julia, then it goes both ways." She hesitated, her lips parting as if to argue, but then she nodded. "I understand." I leaned back in my chair, feeling a strange mixture of relief and dread. I still didn't know if I could go through with this, if I could live with sharing her. But for now, it was a start, a deeply flawed, messy start. The days that followed felt like walking a tightrope over a canyon. Julia and I had agreed to the rules, but the tension between us hadn't eased. If anything, it had intensified. Every glance, every conversation carried an undercurrent of uncertainty, as if we were both waiting for the other to shatter the fragile balance we'd created. On Wednesday evening, Julia sat me down at the dining table after the kids had gone to bed. She looked nervous, her hands fiddling with the edge of her sweater. "I'm seeing him tomorrow," she said quietly. "After work." The words hit like a fist to my gut, even though I'd been expecting them. This was the arrangement, the rules I'd agreed to. Still, hearing her say it out loud made it real in a way that felt unbearable. "Where?" I asked, my voice colder than I intended. "Just dinner," she said quickly. "At that Italian place downtown, La Rosa. I'll be home by 9. I stared at her, searching for something. Remorse, hesitation, anything that might make me believe she wasn't as eager for this as it seemed. But all I saw was determination and a hint of nervousness. Not guilt, not regret. "Fine," I said, standing abruptly. "Enjoy your dinner." "Sam," she started, but I cut her off. "I don't want to talk about it, Julia." My voice was firm, final. "You've made your choice. Now I have to figure out how to live with it." The next day, I came home from work to find the house empty. Julia's car was gone, and the kids were at Chloe's friend's house for a sleepover. The silence was oppressive, every room feeling colder and more alien than it should have. I couldn't sit still, so I poured myself a drink and paced the living room, glancing at the clock every few minutes. 8:30. She'd said she'd be home by 9. I finished my drink, grabbed another, and sat down, staring at the blank TV screen. My mind kept conjuring images of her and Ethan sitting at a candlelit table, laughing, sharing wine, maybe holding hands. I tried to push the thoughts away, but they clung to me like a second skin. At 8:55, the sound of her car pulling into the driveway sent a jolt through me. I sat up straighter, my heart pounding as the front door opened and Julia stepped inside. She hesitated when she saw me, her coat still draped over her arm. "You're still up," she said, her voice tentative. "Of course I'm still up," I said, my tone sharper than I intended. "How was dinner?" "It was fine," she said, setting her purse on the counter. "We just talked. That's all." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "And what exactly do you talk about with the guy you're sleeping with?" "Sam, please," she said, her voice pleading. "Don't do this." "No, Julia," I snapped, standing and walking toward her. "You don't get to tell me how to feel about this. You wanted this arrangement, so now you get to deal with the fallout." She stared at me, her eyes wide and glistening. "I don't want to fight, Sam. I just want us to try to make this work." "Make this work?" I repeated, laughing bitterly. "How, Julia? By pretending everything's fine while you go play house with Ethan?" Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she was going to cry. Instead, she took a deep breath, composing herself. "I told you everything, Sam. I came home on time. I followed the rules. What more do you want from me? I want my wife back," I said, my voice breaking. "The one who loved me enough to put us first." "I do love you," she said, stepping closer. "That's why I'm doing this, because I believe we can find our way back to each other." I stared at her, searching her face for any sign that she truly meant it. But the truth was, I didn't know if I could ever trust her again. "I need space," I said finally, turning away. "Don't push me, Julia. Not tonight." She nodded silently, retreating to the bedroom. I stayed in the living room, nursing my drink and trying to drown out the images of her and Ethan that wouldn't stop playing in my head. The next morning, I woke up on the couch, my head pounding and my heart feeling heavier than ever. Julia was already in the kitchen, making breakfast for the kids like nothing had happened. When she glanced at me, there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Hope, guilt, maybe even fear. We didn't speak as I poured myself a cup of coffee. This wasn't just hard, it was breaking me. And the worst part? A tiny, bitter voice in the back of my mind whispered that it was only going to get worse. The following week was one of those strange stretches of time where every moment felt both endless and fleeting. Julia's date with Ethan hung in the air like a storm cloud, darkening everything but never quite breaking. We functioned as a family on autopilot. School drop-offs, work schedules, after-dinner cleanups. But beneath it all, tension simmered. I couldn't stop thinking about that night, about what she might have said to him, what he might have said to her. Were they laughing together over pasta? Did she lean in closer when he spoke, the way she used to with me? I hated myself for even wondering. On Thursday, Lucas showed up at my office unannounced. He leaned against the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. Figured you could use this, he said, setting one on my desk. I glanced at the clock. It wasn't even noon. Coffee, huh? Not whiskey. Baby steps, he said with a wry grin, pulling up a chair. I sighed, leaning back in my seat. What brings you here, Lucas? He studied me for a moment, his expression softening. You look like hell the last time we talked, and I figured you probably haven't been doing much better since. Insightful. I muttered, taking a sip of the coffee. Have you made any decisions? He asked. I shook my head. How do you even make a decision like this? She's still Julia. The kids love her. Hell, I still love her, or at least I think I do. But every time I look at her, all I can see is him. Lucas leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. You're allowed to be angry, Sam, but you're also allowed to figure out what you want, what you need. This isn't just about her anymore. What I need, I repeated bitterly. You think it's that simple? I think it's a hell of a lot simpler than you're making it, he said. You either find a way to live with this, or you don't. But dragging it out? That's just going to tear you apart. His words hit harder than I wanted to admit. That evening, Julia and I sat across from each other at the dining table after the kids had gone to bed. She looked tired, like the weight of our situation was finally starting to take its toll. I need to know how you're feeling, she said quietly. How I'm feeling, I said, leaning back in my chair. I feel like my entire life has been flipped upside down. I feel betrayed. I feel like I don't even recognize the person I married anymore. How's that for a start? She flinched, but didn't look away. I deserve that, she said. But Sam, we can't keep living like this. If you want me to end things with Ethan, I will, if that's what it takes. Her offer stunned me. I studied her face, trying to figure out if she was serious. And what happens then? I asked. Do you just magically fall back in love with me? Do we pretend this never happened? I don't know, she admitted, her voice trembling. But I do know I don't want to lose you. You should have thought of that before you slept with him, I said coldly. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. You're right. I should have. I made a mistake, Sam. A terrible one. But I'm here trying to fix it. Doesn't that count for something? I stared at her, the anger and sadness twisting together into something I couldn't name. Did it count for something? Could I even begin to forgive her? I don't know, I said finally. I don't know if I can forgive you, Julia. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. And without trust, the words hung in the air between us, unfinished but heavy with implication. She nodded slowly, tears spilling down her cheeks. I understand, she said softly. We sat there in silence, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on us like a physical force. For the first time, I realized that no matter what decision I made, the life we'd once had was gone. Now, all that remained was to figure out what came next, and whether either of us could live with it. The next few days were a whirlwind of avoidance. Julia and I barely spoke outside of necessary conversations about the kids or logistics. I could feel her watching me, gauging my every move, but I didn't give her much to work with. I was trapped in my own head, replaying our last conversation over and over. Could I forgive her? Should I? That Friday night, I found myself at O'Malley's, a bar I hadn't set foot in since my bachelor party. It was a dingy place with sticky floors and cheap whiskey, but that was exactly what I needed. I sat at the corner of the bar, nursing my third drink, when Lucas slid onto the stool beside me. Didn't take you for the dramatic drinking alone type, he said, signaling the bartender for a beer. I didn't take me for the my wife cheated and asked for an open marriage type. I shot back, taking a sip of my whiskey. Lucas winced. Fair. We sat in silence for a while, the hum of bad jukebox music and laughter from a rowdy group in the corner filling the space between us. Finally, Lucas broke the quiet. Have you thought about what you'd do if you said yes? I frowned at him. Yes to what? The open marriage? He nodded. Yeah, let's say you went along with it. What would that look like for you? I stared at my drink, the amber liquid swirling as I turned the glass in my hand. I don't know. I can't even imagine it. What am I supposed to do? Go out and pick up someone at a bar? Join a dating app? Hire a private investigator just to figure out how the hell people do this? Lucas snorted. Not what I meant. I'm asking if you think it would help or just make things worse. I sighed, leaning back against the bar. Worse. Definitely worse. Then there's your answer, he said simply. But it's not that simple, is it? I shot back. If I say no, that's the end of us. She'll leave, and the kids will grow up in a broken home. I don't want that, Lucas. He took a sip of his beer, his expression thoughtful. You think this isn't already broken? His words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I didn't have an answer. The next morning, I woke up with a headache that had nothing to do with alcohol. Julia was in the kitchen when I came downstairs, flipping pancakes while the kids argued about something in the living room. She glanced up as I entered, her expression cautious. "Morning," she said softly. "Morning," I replied, grabbing a mug and pouring myself some coffee. We stood in silence, the weight of everything unsaid filling the air. Finally, she broke it. Not now." I interrupted, my voice firm but not unkind. "The kids are right there." She nodded, turning back to the stove. Later that afternoon, when the kids were outside playing, Julia cornered me in the living room. "I need to know where we stand, Sam," she said, her tone trembling but resolute. "I can't keep living in this limbo." "Neither can you." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I don't know, Julia. I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again." "I get that," she said, stepping closer. "But you need to make a decision. Either we try to fix this or what?" I snapped, cutting her off. "You leave? Move in with Ethan? Is that what you want, Julia?" "No," she said, her voice breaking. "What I want is you, Sam. I've always wanted you. She trailed off, her hands trembling at her sides. "You just what?" I demanded. "I made a mistake," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "And I don't know how to fix it. But I'm trying, Sam. Please believe me, I'm trying." Her words hung in the air, raw and desperate. I wanted to believe her, but the pain in my chest told me it wasn't that simple. "I'll think about it," I said finally, my voice heavy with exhaustion. She nodded, wiping at her tears. "Okay, that's all I'm asking." But as I watched her walk away, I couldn't shake the feeling that no matter what decision I made, we were already too far gone. The following week passed in a blur, each day bleeding into the next. Julia seemed determined to prove that she was serious about fixing things. She made my favorite dinners, cleaned up around the house more than usual, and showered the kids with attention. From the outside, we might have looked like a family on the mend, but inside, I was unraveling. I couldn't stop the images of her and Ethan. Every time she touched my arm or smiled at me, a part of me flinched. At work, I found myself zoning out in meetings, my mind looping around the same questions. Was it even possible to come back from this? Could I live with the knowledge of what she'd done and what she still wanted? That Friday night, I sat alone in the guest room, scrolling aimlessly on my phone. Somehow, I ended up on a dating app. The logo was bright and cheerful, a stark contrast to the dark pit in my stomach as I downloaded it. I wasn't sure what I was doing. Maybe I wanted to feel wanted again, to see if anyone might remind me of what it felt like before all this. Before Julia and Ethan. Setting up a profile was easy enough. I kept it vague, Sam 39, looking for someone to talk to, maybe more. No picture, no details. Just an anonymous placeholder for a man trying to figure out who the hell he was anymore. Within minutes, I had a match. Her name was Serena, and her message was short and to the point. "Hey, some rough day." I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. This felt wrong, but wasn't that the point? Julia had broken the rules first. If we were really doing this open marriage thing, shouldn't I be allowed to explore, too? Finally, I replied, "Yeah, something like that." "You." The next evening, Julia approached me after dinner. The kids were upstairs, and we were alone in the kitchen. "Sam," she said hesitantly, "can we talk?" I set my glass of water down, bracing myself. "What now?" She bit her lip, her hands twisting nervously. I wanted to check in, see where your head's at." I stared at her, the question hanging in the air between us. She looked vulnerable, almost fragile. It was the first time in weeks that I saw a flicker of the Julia I used to know. "I don't know where my head's at," I admitted. "1 minute, I want to believe we can fix this. The next, I feel like I'm drowning in everything you've done." She stepped closer, her voice trembling. "I don't want to lose you, Sam. I know I keep saying that, but it's true. I'll do whatever it takes to make this work." Her words should have comforted me, but instead, they felt hollow. "Will you?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended, because it seems to me like what you really want is to have your cake and eat it too. She flinched, her eyes shining with tears. "That's not fair. I've been trying, Sam. I've been honest with you. I followed the rules we agreed on. And yet, here we are, I said bitterly. She didn't respond, just stood there looking at me with a mixture of pain and frustration. I don't know how to do this, I said finally, my voice dropping. I don't know how to look at you and not see him. I don't know how to trust you again. Her tears spilled over, but she didn't move to wipe them away. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry, Sam. For a moment, I wanted to believe her, to take her in my arms and pretend that everything could go back to the way it was. But deep down, I knew that wasn't possible. I need more time, I said, my voice hollow. She nodded, her tears falling silently as she turned and walked away. That night, I opened the app again. Serena had replied, "Rough day again? Tell me about it." And for the first time, I did. I told her about the betrayal, the open marriage proposal, the confusion and pain that wouldn't let me go. I didn't give her any names, just the broad strokes of my broken life. Her response surprised me. That sounds awful, but can I be honest? It also sounds like you're holding yourself back. Maybe you need to take a risk for once. See where it takes you. A risk. I stared at her message for a long time, my mind racing. For months, I'd been drowning in Julia's choices, her decisions. Maybe it was time I made one of my own. The thought terrified me, but it also felt like the first real breath I'd taken in weeks. The following morning, I woke up feeling restless, my thoughts circling around Serena's message like a vulture over fresh prey. Take a risk, she'd said. But what kind of risk? What did that even mean for someone in my situation? Julia was already up, bustling in the kitchen as the smell of coffee and scrambled eggs wafted through the house. I lingered in the doorway, watching her. She moved with the same effortless grace I'd admired when we first started dating, back when every little thing she did felt like magic. Now all I could see was the gulf between us. "Morning," she said, glancing over her shoulder and offering me a tentative smile. "Morning," I replied, stepping into the kitchen and pouring myself a cup of coffee. The tension was still there, thick and suffocating, but we'd learned how to navigate it. For the kids' sake, if nothing else. "I thought maybe we could go out for dinner tonight," she said, her voice careful. "Just the two of us. We could use the time to talk." I hesitated, unsure how to respond. A part of me wanted to accept, to see if there was still something left between us worth saving. But another part, the darker, angrier part, wanted to refuse. "I'll think about it," I said finally, keeping my tone neutral. She nodded, her smile faltering slightly. That afternoon, I found myself messaging Serena again. "What kind of risk are we talking about?" Her reply came almost instantly. "Whatever feels right to you. Meet someone. Have a conversation. Step outside of your comfort zone. You'd be surprised what you might find." It felt like a challenge, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to accept it. But as I stared at her message, a thought crept into my mind, one I couldn't shake. What if I did meet someone? What if I gave myself the same freedom Julia was asking for? That evening, Julia and I went to dinner at a quiet Italian restaurant on the edge of town. She'd made an effort, wearing a dress I hadn't seen in years and styling her hair the way she used to when we were younger. She looked beautiful, and for a brief moment, I felt a pang of the old familiarity we'd once shared. But then, as we sat across from each other, sipping wine and making stilted conversation, the gulf between us reasserted itself. "I miss this," she said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Us. I miss being close to you, Sam." I stared at her, the words catching me off guard. "Do you?" "Yes," she said earnestly, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "I know I've made mistakes, huge mistakes, but I still love you. And I believe we can find our way back to each other." Her touch was warm, familiar, but it didn't erase the memories of her betrayal. "I don't know if I can get there," I said quietly. "I want to, but I don't know if I can." Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "I understand. I do. I want us to try." I didn't respond. The truth was, I wasn't sure if I had it in me to try anymore. When we got home, I went straight to the guest room, claiming exhaustion. Julia didn't protest, and I could see the hurt in her eyes as I shut the door behind me. I sat on the bed, pulling out my phone. Serena's messages were still there, waiting. "Let's meet," I typed before I could stop myself. Her reply came quickly. "When and where?" The next evening, I found myself sitting in a dimly lit bar on the other side of town. It was far enough from home that I felt safe, though the guilt gnawed at me as I waited. I wasn't even sure what I was doing there or what I hoped to accomplish. When Serena walked in, I recognized her immediately from the photo she'd sent earlier. She was striking, with dark hair that fell in loose waves around her shoulders and a confident, easy smile. "Sam?" she asked, sliding onto the stool next to me. "That's me," I said, forcing a smile. We ordered drinks, and for the next hour we talked about nothing and everything. She told me about her job, her failed marriage, her kids. I told her bits and pieces of my life, careful not to reveal too much. It felt good, easy. At some point, she leaned closer, her voice dropping. "You're not used to this, are you?" "Not even a little," I admitted. She smiled, her hand brushing mine. "That's okay. Everyone starts somewhere." Her touch sent a jolt through me, and for the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Possibility. But as I looked into her eyes, another face flashed in my mind. Julius. And in that moment, I realized the risk Serena had encouraged wasn't just about meeting someone new. It was about deciding who I wanted to be and what I was willing to leave behind. I left the bar shortly after, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Serena had been kind, attentive, and engaging, but as I drove home, her face began to blur in my memory. Julia's face, however, was crystal clear. Every moment of our shared history, every fight, every laugh, every quiet evening on the couch, they all came rushing back in vivid detail. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was dark except for the porch light. Julia must have gone to bed, though I wasn't sure if she'd fallen asleep or was lying awake, waiting for me to come home. I sat in the car for a long moment, staring at the house. My sanctuary, my prison. The next morning, Julia was in the kitchen when I came downstairs. She was wearing her robe, her hair still slightly mussed from sleep. The sight of her, so unguarded and familiar, hit me like a punch to the chest. "Morning," she said softly, her voice tentative. "Morning," I replied, grabbing a mug and pouring myself some coffee. We stood in silence, the weight of my absence the night before hanging between us. She didn't ask where I'd been, and I didn't offer an explanation. Finally, she spoke. "Can we talk?" I nodded, gesturing toward the dining table. We sat across from each other, just like we had so many nights before. "I don't want to keep doing this," she said, her hands clasped tightly together. "I don't want us to keep circling around each other, pretending like everything's okay when it's not." "I don't either," I said, setting my coffee down. She took a deep breath, her eyes locked on mine. "I know I hurt you, Sam. I know I broke something between us, and I know I can't undo that. But I still believe we can fix this, if we're both willing to try." Her words stirred something in me, a flicker of hope buried under layers of anger and pain. But that hope was fragile, and I wasn't sure if it was enough. "What does fixing this even look like to you?" I asked. "It means being honest," she said. "It means talking to each other, really talking, even when it's hard. It means letting go of what happened and focusing on what we want moving forward." I laughed bitterly. "Letting go? Julia, you're asking me to forget the fact that you slept with someone else. Do you have any idea how impossible that feels?" Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "I'm not asking you to forget, Sam. I'm asking you to forgive. Because if we don't find a way to do that, this marriage is over." Her words hung in the air like a challenge. "Do you still want Ethan?" I asked bluntly. She hesitated, her hands tightening on the table. "No," she said finally. "I ended things with him." The admission caught me off guard. "When?" "After our last fight," she said. "I realized that if I kept seeing him, I'd lose you for good. And I couldn't live with that." I stared at her, searching her face for any sign of deception. But all I saw was sincerity and fear. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wasn't sure it would matter," she said, her voice breaking. "You've been so distant, Sam. I thought maybe you'd already decided to leave." Her words cut deep because, in some ways, she was right. I'd been preparing myself for an exit, building walls to protect myself from the fallout. But now, hearing her say she'd ended things with Ethan, something inside me shifted. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said finally. Her tears spilled over, but she nodded. "I know, but I'm willing to spend the rest of my life earning that forgiveness, Sam. If you'll let me." Later that night, after the kids were in bed, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the flickering light of the TV. Julia's words replayed in my head over and over. She'd ended things with Ethan. She wanted to fix this. But did I? I thought about Serena, about the easy conversation and the spark of possibility she'd offered. It was tempting, so tempting to start fresh with someone new. But when I pictured my future, it wasn't Serena's face I saw. It was Julia's. With a deep breath, I pulled out my phone and opened the dating app. Serena had sent me another message earlier. It was great meeting you. Let me know if you'd like to get together again. I hesitated for a moment, then typed my reply. I'm sorry. I can't. And just like that, I deleted the app. If there was any chance of saving my marriage, I owed it to myself and to Julia to give it everything I had. That night, for the first time in weeks, I climbed into bed next to Julia. She stirred, turning to face me in the dim light. Sam, she murmured, her voice heavy with sleep. I'm here, I said softly. Her hand reached out, finding mine in the darkness. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't pull away. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe. New cheating wife stories tomorrow.